Thank you, Commander Assam, Tom Stray, special guests, ladies and gentlemen. I truly do stand here today humbled to be given the opportunity to speak to you. I did speak last year at the cemetery, but we all know times were different then. Today, we see the blanket of the pandemic lifting, and we're all outside enjoying this beautiful weather, and we're enjoying the freedoms that so many people have sacrificed their lives for. On this day, we honor all who perished in all the wars as Americans. And everyone here, with the exception of maybe the youngest, knows about the horrors of war through one or more of four reasons. You were there, you know someone that was there. Certainly since Vietnam, we've watched it on the 6 o'clock news every night, and or we read about it, studied about it in the schools. And I believe over the past many years that I've been involved with the military and programs as we're here today to enjoy, oftentimes we have focused our attention on World War II. And I suppose it's one that most of us can relate to through our parents, our grandparents. But as was mentioned earlier, Memorial Day, long ago, was designed to recognize those of all the wars. And I don't mean to diminish by any stretch of the imagination the sacrifices of those who most of us recognize today as the greatest generation, because I still believe that that's true. But I think there are so many other wars, conflicts, battles that people are unaware of, that we should pay attention and recognize them as well. So, when you think of all the brave men and women who have sacrificed and given their lives for this country, we have to include the Korean War, Vietnam, Lebanon, Grenada, Panama, the Gulf War, Somalia, Haiti, Bosnia, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and the list goes on and on and on. I suppose it's just a fact of human nature that at some point disagreements become so bad that we have to go to war. It's sad, but it's a reality. But you may have noticed in that list 2 particular wars that aren't mentioned. And I was surprised earlier on when the Civil War was mentioned in our prayer and the Gettysburg Address was read. Because I decided when I was asked to do this that maybe I would address one in particular. But those 2 wars, the American Revolutionary War and the Civil War. Now, the American Revolutionary War is pretty easy to talk about because we all know, standing here today, that had it turned out differently, well, we probably wouldn't be standing here today. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, they would have been tried and executed as traitors. But it did, and we thank God for that. Later in our history, as we're still a growing nation, the second great war we get involved in, the American Civil War. Now, I'm not standing here today to argue the point about the facts of the Civil War. I'm just here to talk today about the sacrifices that men and women are willing to make for their beliefs. So I'd ask you this. If you could imagine at this moment in time what this country would look like had the Civil War not taken place. I don't think that any of us in our hearts could say that we would look the same as we do today. Or imagine that the Civil War had taken place and that Abraham Lincoln had not been assassinated. Because you see, Abraham Lincoln had a plan for re-inviting the South once again into the country. Unfortunately, he never got to carry out that plan, as we all know. And certain powers that be decided that instead of reconciliation, it would be punishment. And we enter into the Reconstruction era, the era of carpetbaggers, and a poor choice of the passing of power in many cases. Also, if that hadn't occurred, and it had been more of a reconciliatory effort after the Civil War, one of the most dangerous, ill-gotten, horrible groups in American history may have never been formed, Ku Klux Klan. So things certainly would have been a lot different, potentially, in those cases. But you see, we can't go back. And I suppose that's my theme today is we can't change history as much as we might want to in any different thing. I don't care if it's you're playing a sport, you miss an easy layup, or you strike out at the final inning of the game. It can't be changed. It's history. Once it's history, it's done. So you have to take everything in its proper context at the time that it happened. There are very few certainties in life, but certainly one of them is that we can't change that history. We can study history, we can praise or vilify history, we can regret the past, you can even try to atone for the past, but you can't change it. We can't change it by rewriting history books, removing things from the curriculum, removing visual reminders. History, right, wrong, or indifferent, is history. And the purpose is to study and learn and hopefully not make the mistake again. So, what are we going to take from that era that we can move forward today to understand compassion, forgiveness? Regardless of your feelings about the Civil War, there's one thing you always have to bear in mind, is that they were Americans before they became Americans again. So we know, that was read to us earlier, that Abraham Lincoln in 1863 at Gettysburg National Cemetery read the Gettysburg Address, the last statement of which I'm going to repeat, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Tremendously dynamic speech and words and meaning. And that sentimentality brings us here to Memorial Day. Now, if you research Memorial Day, there are many different versions of what might have been the first Memorial Day. Going back to 1865, a group in South Carolina laid flowers at a grave in Charleston. In 1866, there was a group of women in Columbus, Mississippi, who decorated the graves of the soldiers. And as the research tells me, that at that time they suggested that, being from Mississippi, of course, that not only they lay the flowers at the graves of the Confederate soldiers, but the Union soldiers as well, recognized that each person in that grave was someone's father, someone's brother, someone's son. A New York lawyer was so touched by this that he wrote a poem of reconciliation. It was published in the Atlantic Monthly in 1867. The final stanza of that poem reads, "No more shall the war cry sever, or the winding rivers be red. They banish our anger forever when they laurel the graves of our dead. Under the sod and under the dew, waiting the judgment day. Love and tears for the blue, tear and loves for the gray." So the sentiment was forgiveness. And then, as also was mentioned earlier about General Logan making the proclamation that the last Monday in May be recognized as Memorial Day. During that ceremony, then Ohio Congressman James Garfield was part of that recognition, and he made this statement. "We do not know one promise that these men made, one pledge they gave, one word they spoke. But we do know that they summed up and perfected by one supreme act the highest virtues of men and citizens. For love of country they accepted death, and thus resolved all doubts, and made immortal their patriotism and their virtue." And they were recognizing at that time that was the National Cemetery recognition or formation that they were doing, and they recognized 620-some thousand dead that were buried in that area. So that by that number alone, we know that it includes both the North and the South. In 1869, then President McKinley, talking about the Civil War, "Every soldier's grave made during the unfortunate Civil War is a tribute to American valor. And while those graves were made, we differed widely about the future of the government. Those differences were long ago settled by arbitrament of arms. And the time has now come in the evolution of sentiment and feeling, under the providence of God, when in the spirit of fraternity we should share with you in the care and the graves of the Confederate soldier." So once again, forgiveness, reconciliation. And even though we know that the South was attempting to secede, you got to recognize, taking in its context, time and the place, they were making a decision, and that decision led them to sign that blank check to the government for up to and including their life. They paid the supreme cost. So again, as we approach, or we're into 2021, future generations, we shouldn't, as a nation, try to eliminate the past from ourselves or our children. It's the way we learn and we recognize. So it wasn't whether you believed in the cause of the North or the South. The goal was to reunite, recognize the valor, not justifying any particular cause, but recognizing that these were also Americans fighting for their beliefs. And isn't that what we ask of our military personnel today? Young men landing in Normandy, Iwo Jima, Bella Woods, throughout Vietnam, young men who believed, for the most part, in what they were doing. I know we had the draft, and there were certainly people that maybe not felt the same way, but they went, and many of them died, and they died for us. So when you think, in the first 100 years of our existence, 683,000 Americans lost their lives. The Civil War accounted for 91% of that. Comparatively, over the next 100 years, 626,000 Americans lost their lives, with World War II accounting for 62% of that. But you had World War I, you had World War II, and you had Vietnam. That's an astounding number of heroic men and women, each playing a role in what our country looks like today. And each one deserves to be remembered and honored and given our thanks. As I look across the lake, I see the memorial that has been dedicated. Thank you. I see the memorial that this city has built in dedication to the veterans of our wars and those that have, again, made the ultimate sacrifice. So I would ask you now, just in place, to bow your head for a moment of silence for your family, other families that have lost loved ones in the strife to be America. Thank you. So once again, I would like to thank you for allowing me to speak here today. And I'll end this with one more quote that I think is so apropos. It's by General George S. Patton. "It is foolish and wrong to mourn the men who died. Rather, we should thank God that such men lived." Thank you, and have a wonderful Memorial Day.